The atmosphere on Arcadia 7 was nothing short of breathtaking. The sprawling city glittered under the stars, its towering skyscrapers made of sleek, polished metals reflecting the light of distant suns. Arcadia was an intergalactic hub, a place where representatives from various species, humans included, came together to exchange knowledge, trade resources, and forge alliances. This particular night, however, was about something far more important. Peace. Lucas Armitage, a young but sharp-witted human diplomat, had been assigned the delicate task of negotiating a peace treaty between humanity and the Argians, a species as advanced in technology as they were enigmatic in culture. The Argians were not like humans, emotionless, logical, and incredibly precise. They valued reason above all else, and even small gestures could carry significant meaning. Lucas was standing in the grand hall of the Arcadian embassy, a place that felt more like a palace than a building. The hall was filled with representatives from all across the galaxy, each species more unique and strange than the last. There were creatures with skin that shimmered like liquid metal, beings with multiple eyes, and towering giants who seemed to be made entirely of energy. Despite the diversity, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation. This event was supposed to mark the end of years of conflict between the humans and the Argians. At the center of the room stood Zira, the Argian ambassador. She was tall even by Argian standards, with smooth, translucent skin that gave her a faint, ethereal glow. Her eyes, large and oval, shone with an otherworldly light, violet, almost hypnotic. She was the epitome of Argian grace and composure. Her expression was unreadable, as it always was, her mouth set in a neutral line, and yet there was an undeniable aura of power and intelligence about her. Lucas, who had been studying her from across the room, felt a wave of uncertainty. He had met many aliens in his line of work, but the Argians were unlike any species he had encountered before. They did not speak much, and their culture was so different from human customs that Lucas could hardly predict how his humor, often his secret weapon in tense situations, would be received. After all, how would a race that valued logic and reason interpret humor? As if answering his silent question, Lucas's colleague, Tessa, nudged him in the side. "You're not going to try your jokes on her, are you?" she asked with a half-smile. Lucas chuckled softly, running a hand through his short, messy hair. "Why not? What's the worst that could happen?" Tessa shook her head, clearly unconvinced, but Lucas was already walking toward the delegation. He had been briefed on the significance of this event. The treaty was delicate, and every gesture would be scrutinized. He was determined to maintain a calm, composed demeanor throughout the evening. But a part of him knew that he had to keep the mood light, especially with Zira. When he reached the Argian ambassador, Zira's eyes locked with his, and for a moment, Lucas felt as though she could see right through him, reading his every thought. Her gaze was piercing, unblinking, but there was something else there, something almost human. But Lucas wasn't about to overthink it. "Ambassador Zira," he said, bowing slightly. "It's an honor to meet you in person." Zira's gaze softened just a fraction as she inclined her head in return. "The honor is mine, Diplomat Armitage. Your presence is most timely." The conversation began as expected, with formalities and pleasantries exchanged. The treaty was the main topic, as it should have been. However, Lucas couldn't help but notice how stiff and robotic the conversation felt. Zira was always polite, always professional, but it was like talking to a wall. No smiles, no laughter. Just calculated words meant to convey information and nothing more. An awkward silence settled between them. As the minutes ticked by, Lucas found himself growing more uncomfortable. He had to do something, anything, to break the tension. He took a deep breath and with his usual charming grin decided to test the waters. "Well, I suppose after all this hard work I've earned a reward, right?" he said with a wink. "Maybe a kiss? A small one, of course, just for good luck." At first, Zira just stared at him, her eyes wide but unblinking. It was as though Lucas had just said something profound, something he had no way of understanding. For a brief, unnerving moment, he wondered if he had made a mistake. Then, to his shock, Zira stepped closer to him. The room seemed to fall into a deep silence, and every eye was now on the two of them. Her tall, lithe form loomed over him, and she raised a delicate hand to gently cup his face. Her cool fingers brushed against his skin, and Lucas found himself rooted in place, unable to move or even speak. "Yes, human," Zira said, her voice soft yet steady. "You may kiss me." For a moment, Lucas was frozen, unsure of whether this was some sort of bizarre misunderstanding or if she was actually taking him seriously. He had been joking, of course, but in that instant the words came back to him, and he realized with a start that Zira was not joking at all. Her eyes remained fixed on his, waiting for him to act. It was a strange, almost alien moment that felt entirely outside of his control. The room around them was utterly silent now, with people watching, some bewildered, some smiling, but all fascinated by the unfolding scene. Lucas was at a loss for words. He had only made the joke to break the ice, to ease the tension that had built between them, but Zira, who had remained so calm and composed, was serious, dead serious. It was clear now that in her culture a request for a kiss wasn't just a playful gesture. It was a significant act. Realization dawned on him. By saying those words, he had unknowingly committed to something far greater than a joke. With a deep breath, he decided to go along with it. He had no idea what this would mean for his career, for the peace talks, or for his own understanding of this strange alien race, but at that moment, there was no turning back. Lucas closed his eyes and leaned forward. The kiss, when it came, was unlike anything he had expected. Zira's lips were cold, like ice against his own, but they were soft, delicate. There was an odd sense of serenity in the touch, as though the universe itself had slowed down just for them. For a brief instant, time itself seemed to pause, and Lucas could feel the weight of her culture, the seriousness of the gesture, and what it might mean for their future. When they parted, Lucas opened his eyes to see Zira still gazing at him, her expression unreadable. "Is that acceptable?" she asked, her voice as calm as ever. Lucas, still trying to recover from the shock of it all, nodded slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. "Yeah, I think that's more than acceptable." The crowd around them slowly began to murmur, but Lucas barely heard them. All he could focus on was Zira's eyes, still locked onto him as if waiting for his next move. What had he just done? The following days felt like they were running in slow motion for Lucas. The events at the Arcadian banquet had set a chain of reactions in motion that he wasn't prepared for. What had started as a joke, a harmless, playful comment, had evolved into something that made him feel like he was caught in the middle of an alien world he barely understood. After the kiss, the entire atmosphere had shifted. Lucas couldn't quite explain it, but there was a certain tension hanging in the air whenever he was near Zira. The alien ambassador was as composed and regal as ever, but there was an undeniable shift in her presence. Her eyes, which had once felt so distant, now seemed to hold a deeper meaning whenever they met his. That evening, as Lucas walked back to his quarters, he couldn't help but replay the events over and over in his mind. He had never intended for things to escalate the way they had. He'd cracked the joke as a way to ease the tension, but now it felt like he had opened a door to something much more serious, something he couldn't shut again. The next morning, Lucas received a formal message from Zira. The message was simple, yet the formality of it made his stomach tighten. "Human diplomat Lucas Armitage, I will meet you tomorrow at the Central Plaza. I trust you are prepared for the next step in our negotiations." The words were polite, even cordial, but there was something in the tone that Lucas couldn't ignore. Zira was not just a political figure. She was someone with her own culture, and her culture had its own rules and customs. He had unknowingly participated in something that he now realized was a big deal to her. That kiss wasn't just a casual gesture. It was something far more significant in Argian society. At the Central Plaza the following afternoon, the situation only became more confusing. The plaza was a beautiful, sprawling courtyard at the heart of Arcadia's capital, surrounded by towering trees that shimmered with bioluminescent leaves and delicate statues that seemed to hum with an energy all their own. The plaza was where many important events on Arcadia took place, and today, it was set up for a casual meeting between the human diplomats and the Argian delegation. As Lucas walked toward the meeting area, he saw Zira waiting for him, standing tall, her glowing violet eyes watching him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. Her regal presence hadn't changed, but now, it seemed like there was an unspoken understanding between them, something that Lucas couldn't quite grasp. "Ambassador Zira," Lucas greeted, trying to sound confident despite the nervous energy running through him. He extended his hand, a gesture he hoped would remind them both of the professionalism required for this delicate mission. Zira didn't immediately respond to the handshake. Instead, her eyes flickered down to his hand, then back up to his face. Her expression remained calm, but Lucas noticed a subtle shift in her posture, slightly more relaxed than usual, but still dignified. "Lucas Armitage," Zira said, her voice as cool and controlled as ever. "I trust you are well." "Yes, of course," Lucas replied, trying his best to appear unbothered by the strange tension between them. "It's been a busy few days, but everything is going according to plan." She nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving his face. Then, without any warning, Zira stepped closer to him, her presence almost overwhelming. The crowd around them had begun to thin, and it felt as though they were the only two people in the vast plaza. Lucas could feel the weight of her eyes on him, as though she was searching for something deep within him. "Human," Zira said, her voice quieter now, almost intimate. "We are not here simply to discuss the treaty. There is more to the bond we have formed." Lucas blinked, his mind racing. "The bond?" he repeated, trying to keep his voice steady. "What do you mean?" Zira didn't answer right away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him with an intensity that made Lucas feel exposed. After a long moment, she spoke again. "When you requested a kiss at the banquet, it was not a trivial matter," she explained. "In my culture, such a request is not made lightly. A kiss is a declaration, an offering of trust. By accepting it, you have honored me and my people, and now there is a certain understanding between us." Lucas's heart raced. He had made a joke, a light-hearted comment that he thought was harmless. But in Zira's eyes, it was something far deeper, something that went beyond the surface of simple diplomacy. You're saying that the kiss was more than just a gesture?" Lucas asked, trying to wrap his mind around it. Zira nodded slowly. "Yes, a bond has been formed between us, a bond that cannot be easily undone. In my culture, when two people share such an act, they are bound by it. It signifies trust, respect, and mutual understanding." Lucas felt a wave of confusion wash over him. He had joked, not realizing that the act was more serious than he could have ever imagined. And now it seemed that Zira expected something more from him, something that went beyond the political and diplomatic realm. "But what does that mean for us?" Lucas asked, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. Zira's expression softened, but only slightly. "It means that we are now connected in a way that is not easily explained. You are no longer just a diplomat to me, Lucas. You are someone with whom I share a bond, one that transcends simple negotiations and agreements." For a moment, Lucas was speechless. He had no idea how to respond. This was not what he had signed up for. All he had wanted was to make the peace talks work, to help bring the two sides together and put an end to years of conflict. But now it seemed that he had unintentionally stepped into something much bigger, something that involved more than just words on paper. As the silence stretched between them, Lucas finally managed to speak. "I didn't mean to make things complicated. I was just trying to lighten the mood, you know." "I didn't realize," Zira interrupted him, her voice gentle but firm. "I do not hold your actions against you, human. You did not know the significance of your request. But now that you understand, I must ask, will you honor the bond you have created? Will you allow it to guide the path of our negotiations and perhaps our future?" The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Lucas's mind raced, but his heart told him one thing. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This wasn't just about the treaty. This was something more personal, something that involved not just his duty as a diplomat, but his own understanding of what it meant to connect with another being, another species. "I don't know if I can fully understand all of this, Zira," Lucas admitted, his voice low, "but I want to try. I'll do whatever it takes to make things work. For the treaty, for the future of both our people." Zira nodded, the faintest smile touching the corner of her lips. "Then let us begin." And with that, the unspoken understanding between them deepened. What had started as a diplomatic mission, a simple task to negotiate peace, had turned into something far more complex, a bond that was forged not by words or agreements, but by a single moment of vulnerability. As Lucas stood there, facing Zira in the quiet of the plaza, he realized that the next few days, weeks, and possibly years of his life were about to change in ways he could not yet comprehend. The peace talks were important, yes, but the real work, the real challenge lay ahead. He had unknowingly crossed a line, and now he had to navigate a path he had never expected, one that would not only shape the future of human and Argian relations but also his own future. To be continued. The days following his conversation with Zira felt like walking through a fog. The peace talks were moving forward as planned, but Lucas couldn't shake the weight of his unexpected bond with the Argian ambassador. It wasn't just a matter of diplomacy anymore. It was something more personal, more complicated. He had entered this mission with one goal in mind: to secure peace for humanity. But now it seemed he was bound by something far more unpredictable. Zira, as always, remained calm, composed, and professional, but there was a subtle shift in her behavior that Lucas couldn't ignore. It was as though she was always just a little too close to him, her violet eyes always a little too intense. Whenever their gazes met, it was no longer just a casual exchange between diplomats. There was a deep understanding in her stare, as if they shared something that no one else could comprehend. Lucas had always been a man of reason, relying on logic and clear thinking to navigate the complex world of intergalactic politics. But with Zira, nothing made sense anymore. The kiss, once a joke, had turned into a symbol, a gesture that neither of them could take back. And now, it seemed, it was shaping the future of their negotiations in ways that no one had anticipated. Despite his confusion, Lucas couldn't deny that Zira's presence was magnetic. She wasn't just an ambassador. She was an enigma, someone who commanded attention without even trying. Her quiet strength, her graceful movements, and her unwavering focus made her both intimidating and fascinating. And every time they spoke, Lucas found himself drawn to her in ways that went beyond professional respect. One evening, as the two of them walked through the lush gardens of Arcadia's central courtyard, Lucas couldn't help but notice the way Zira's eyes flickered as they passed under the soft glow of the garden lights. The air between them felt charged, alive with something unspoken. "Zira," Lucas began, his voice hesitant as they strolled side by side. "I don't know if I fully understand everything that's happening between us, but I want to make it clear that I'm here for the treaty, for peace." Zira glanced at him, her expression as calm as ever. "I know, Lucas, you are dedicated to your people. I respect that." She paused for a moment, her eyes turning to the horizon. "But you must understand that in my culture, what we share now is more than just a political arrangement. It is a bond, and bonds like these are not easily severed." Lucas stopped walking, his heart racing. He had never thought of the kiss in those terms, never imagined that it could mean something so lasting, so profound. He had been focused on the treaty, on the bigger picture, and had brushed aside the personal connection that had formed between him and Zira. "You're saying that this bond, it's permanent?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Zira turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the garden. "It is not a bond that can be undone. Once it is formed, it becomes part of who we are. It shapes us, guides us." Her voice softened. "And it will shape you too, Lucas, whether you are ready or not." The weight of her words hung in the air, and Lucas found himself at a loss for how to respond. What did this mean for the peace talks? For his future? He had never been one to shy away from responsibility, but this was something different, something he hadn't signed up for. "I never expected any of this," he said, shaking his head. "I never imagined that a joke could lead to something like this." Zira's gaze softened, though her expression remained serious. "In my culture, there is no room for lightheartedness when it comes to matters of trust. What you offered me that night was not a joke, it was an invitation. And now we are bound by that invitation whether we like it or not." Lucas took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had to admit that Zira was right. The kiss had not been a simple gesture. It had meant something to her, and it had changed the course of their relationship forever. But that didn't mean he was ready for the emotional weight that came with it. His life had just become much more complicated. "I need some time to think about all of this," Lucas said, his voice thick with uncertainty. "I need to understand what this means, not just for us, but for everyone involved." Zira nodded, her face unreadable. "Take all the time you need, human, but know this, there is no turning back. The path we are on is one that cannot be undone. Whatever comes next, we will face it together." With those final words, Zira turned and walked away, leaving Lucas standing alone in the garden, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. He had come to Arcadia 7 to secure peace, but now it seemed that peace was only the beginning. What lay ahead was unknown, and Lucas wasn't sure if he was ready for it. The next few days were filled with even more confusion. The treaty discussions continued as planned, but Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that he was now walking on a tightrope. Zira was ever present, always by his side during meetings, her gaze unyielding and steady. The room seemed to shrink whenever she was near, and Lucas found himself constantly aware of her presence, of the bond they had unknowingly formed. It wasn't just the peace talks that were on the line anymore. It was their connection. The kiss that had started as a joke had become the foundation of something far more complicated, and Lucas wasn't sure if he was prepared for what that meant. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting, Lucas found himself alone in the observation room of the embassy, staring out at the vast expanse of stars. He leaned against the window, his hands pressed against the cool glass, lost in thought. The weight of the treaty, the bond with Zira, and the future of humanity all seemed to press down on him at once. A soft sound behind him made him turn. It was Zira standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "You've been avoiding me," she said, her voice calm but with a hint of something more, something he couldn't quite place. "I'm not avoiding you," Lucas replied, though his voice betrayed him. "I just need some time to think." Zira stepped forward, her gaze fixed on him. "You've been thinking for days. It's time you stopped running from the truth." Lucas turned away from the window, facing her fully now. "The truth? What truth?" "The truth that we are bound by something greater than just this treaty," Zira said softly. "What we share goes beyond political alliances. It is personal, and you cannot deny it any longer." Lucas opened his mouth to protest, but the words caught in his throat. He had been trying to rationalize everything, trying to make sense of the unexpected turn his life had taken. But Zira was right. He couldn't run from the truth any longer. They were connected in a way that defied logic, defied reason, and the more he tried to fight it, the more he realized that it was something he couldn't control. "I don't know what to do with all of this," Lucas admitted, his voice quieter now. "I didn't ask for any of this. But now that it's here, I don't know how to handle it." Zira stepped closer, her presence overwhelming but not unwelcoming. "You don't have to handle it alone, Lucas. We are in this together. This bond, this connection, it is not a burden but a gift, and together we will find our way." For the first time in days, Lucas felt a sense of calm wash over him. He wasn't alone in this, and maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to figure it all out on his own. The days after their conversation in the observation room passed in a blur for Lucas. He had hoped that the strange, unspoken connection between him and Zira would fade with time, that it was just a result of the tension surrounding the peace talks. But it didn't. If anything, it only grew stronger. Every time he saw Zira, it was as if the room grew smaller. Her presence was always there, quiet, constant, and impossible to ignore. Their meetings became more frequent, their discussions more personal. At first, Lucas had tried to keep things professional, reminding himself that he was here to secure peace. But he knew deep down that this was no longer just about politics. It was about something much more complex. Zira had been right all along. The bond they shared, the kiss that had started as a simple joke, had grown into something neither of them could deny. It wasn't just a matter of culture or diplomacy anymore. It was about trust, respect, and in some strange way an understanding that went beyond words. One evening, as Lucas sat in his quarters preparing for another round of peace talks, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The negotiations had reached a critical point. The treaty was almost complete, but there were still lingering doubts. There were certain factions, both human and Argian, who weren't convinced that peace was the right path. Tensions were high and time was running out. Lucas had always prided himself on his ability to handle high-pressure situations, but this was different. He wasn't just representing humanity now. He was representing something much more personal. The bond with Zira had woven itself into the fabric of his life, and it was impossible to separate the two anymore. Just as he was about to gather his papers for the meeting, the door to his quarters slid open. Zira stepped inside, her glowing violet eyes meeting his with that familiar intensity. "Lucas," she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge of urgency. "We need to talk." Lucas felt his heart rate increase. "About what?" he asked, his voice steady despite the anxiety rising in his chest. "About everything," Zira replied, stepping closer. "About us. About the future of the peace talks, and about what happens after the treaty is signed." Lucas swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves. He had known this conversation was coming, but he wasn't sure he was ready for it. The truth was, he didn't know what to expect. He didn't know what kind of future he was supposed to have, not just with Zyra, but with everything that had been set in motion by that single, accidental kiss. Zyra, he said quietly, his voice almost lost in the room. I'm not sure what you want from me. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. The peace talks, the bond, everything. It's all become so much more complicated than I ever imagined. Zyra tilted her head, her gaze softening just slightly. I know, Lucas. This wasn't what either of us expected. But sometimes things happen for reasons we don't understand at first. She paused for a moment, her eyes searching his face as if trying to read his thoughts. The bond we share is not something I take lightly. It's not just a cultural formality or a political gesture. It is real and it has meaning. But I also understand that this is not easy for you. You come from a world where things are simpler, where bonds are formed through words, actions, and choices. But my people, the Argians, view such connections differently. To us, they are a responsibility, a promise. Lucas felt the weight of her words settle over him like a heavy cloak. A promise? He repeated, his voice thick with the complexity of it all. Yes, Zyra said, her voice soft but firm. When I accepted your gesture, when I allowed you to seal our connection with that kiss, I did so knowing that it would shape both our lives. But I also accepted the responsibility that comes with it. I am not asking you to accept something that you are not ready for. But I need you to understand that there is no turning back from this. The future we are facing is one we will face together. Lucas took a deep breath, his mind racing. This wasn't just about peace anymore. It wasn't just about the treaty. It was about something far more intimate, something that neither he nor Zyra had anticipated. He had thought of the bond as a simple cultural formality at first, but now he saw it for what it truly was. A promise. A promise that bound them together in ways that went beyond their respective worlds. I'm not sure if I'm ready for this, Lucas said, his voice cracking slightly. I've spent my whole life trying to understand others, trying to find common ground. But this is different. This is personal. And I don't know if I'm capable of keeping that promise. Zyra took a step closer to him, her presence calm and reassuring. Lucas, you don't have to have all the answers right now. What matters is that we move forward. Together. The peace talks are almost over. The treaty will be signed and humanity and the Argians will have a new future. But beyond that, there is the question of what we do with this bond. And that, my human friend, is something we will figure out together. For the first time in days, Lucas felt a sense of clarity. Zyra wasn't asking for more than he could give. She wasn't demanding that he understand everything right away. She was offering him a path, a future, one that was uncertain but one that they would walk together. I don't know what comes next, Lucas said quietly, but I'm willing to try. For the treaty, for peace, and maybe for us. Zyra's eyes softened, and for the first time a small smile touched her lips. That is all I ask, Lucas. That is all I need. The next day, the final session of the peace talks began. The room was filled with representatives from both sides, human and Argian diplomats, military leaders, and political figures, all gathered to finalize the treaty that would end years of conflict. The tension was palpable, the stakes higher than ever. But as Lucas sat at the table, his mind was not on the treaty itself. It was on Zyra, who sat across from him, her presence like a quiet force that seemed to center everything around them. The negotiations went smoothly, despite the occasional disagreement. The key points of the treaty were clear: shared resources, mutual defense agreements, and a commitment to open communication. It was the culmination of years of effort, but Lucas knew that the real challenge lay ahead. The treaty was just the beginning. The true test would come once the ink was dry, when the cameras were off and the world had moved on. When the treaty was finally signed, there was a moment of silence in the room, a collective breath held as history was made. Lucas felt the weight of the moment, but he also felt something else. A sense of resolution. The peace talks were over. The treaty was secured, and now the bond with Zyra would guide them both into an uncertain future. As the room erupted into applause, Lucas stood, turning to Zyra. She met his gaze, her violet eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name. A promise, a future. The same things that had brought them together were now the things that would carry them forward. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. Lucas and Zira were no longer just diplomats. They were something more, something bound by a connection that neither of them had expected but both had come to respect. Together, they would face whatever came next.